Hello. Recently, videos of a 70-year-old man dancing in public in Iran have gone viral. Few people can hope to achieve such celebrity status at that ripe age. And by the way, the dance itself isn't some kind of physical feat. This is just an older man named Sadegh expressing his humanity, getting down with it, and enjoying himself, being alive and joyful in the world. He's recycling an older song from the 1970s with lyrics to big up himself, so to speak. So what's the buzz about? How many people here know what I'm talking about? Ooh, I see some hands. Soon after the video's release, people in Iran and around the world started imitating the dance with its very sort of catchy tune. It got so popular that the Iranian government tried to shut it down, but it had to sort of back off because of popular pressure and because Bouri is a man. Let's face it, if he was a woman, this would be a different story. To top it off, some young people collaborated with him to create a professional music video. So let's take a quick look. First, the impromptu viral dance video, and then the polished music video. There were kimono-clad ladies, youngsters in Turkey, and even a group of Maasai in Kenya paying homage. Bouri's dance had global resonance, and in some international iterations, because people couldn't pronounce the q in Bouri, it sounded like they were paying tribute to an old man named Boogie. It was perfect. Uncle Boogie, as he's now called, has become a purveyor of joy at a time when Iranians have been having a hard time politically, economically. Their government has taken them down difficult paths, and most people have a very hard time envisioning their future in positive ways. His dance came at the tail end of Iran's Women Life Freedom Uprising, which started in 2022 when the young woman by the name of Mahsa Jina Amini died in morality police detention. People across Iran rose up. They rose up to say that the government had no right to put anyone, including this young girl, young Kurdish girl from the margins of Iranian society, in a situation where they could lose their life for something so trivial as a few strands of hair. In the protests that followed, security forces killed more than 500 people, including 68 children, mostly teenagers, and maimed and arrested thousands. This was an intersectional uprising that at the core expressed a national desire for liberation, the liberation of women, the liberation of people at large, the liberation of Iranian culture from the imposition of a singular religious framing. People were demanding the liberation of life and the life force. And because this was a liberation that was tied to bodily autonomy, we saw people, especially women, dancing all over Iran. They presented this political alterity, this other world-making. In the midst of global despair, of war, of rising inequalities, came this incredibly hopeful uprising from Iran. The movement asked for nothing short of a free and dignified life, and the people of the world rose up in solidarity with the people of Iran. Iranians had done everything to reform their system and failed. And as much as the leaders of the Islamic Republic are the main culprits in this, it seemed like the US had conspired with them to prevent Iranians from achieving their goals. Consistently over decades, from funding Saddam's war against Iran in the 1980s, to rejecting a cooperation overture after 9/11 and instead threatening with war, to imposing extreme sanctions, withdrawing from the nuclear deal and imposing yet more sanctions, US policies had inadvertently empowered the hardliners in Iran, closing off avenues for reform. Now the Women Life Freedom Uprising was asking for wholesale change of the system. As we know today, it hasn't succeeded, but it has left traces everywhere, including this phenomenon of public dancing that has become so prevalent. But why all this dancing at such a seemingly dark moment of despair? These viral dance videos recall my childhood in Iran. That's me striking a pose on my first birthday. I grew up during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s and have vivid memories of aerial bombardments. And yet when I think about my childhood, my predominant memories are of social gatherings and dancing. Has anyone here been to a Persian party? Yoo-hoo! If you have, you know that the moment the music is turned on, half the people, at least half the people, jump to their feet to dance. Even during the raging war, and maybe especially so, people made sure to keep up the music and dancing. It was a testament to life. And by the way, this is not because my family was somehow divorced from the country's wartime reality. That was not possible. My 3 handsome young uncles were all at the war front, and a branch of my family had been swept up by the Ayatollah's ideology following the 1979 revolution and forbade music in their house completely. Divisions over the revolution and music were prevalent in a lot of families. As I've scrolled through video upon video of groups of Iranian men doing dance memes or boogieing to some street music, it's just struck me how different these men are from the images we see of Middle Eastern men in the US. The majority of Americans only get to behold images of Middle Eastern people, men in particular, in the context of conflict and war, and in fact, the entire region as a region of conflict. Think about it. What do you see in your mind's eye when you think about the Middle East or Middle Eastern men? I got to get an idea of that eventually working as a journalist in the region. A few months after I graduated, 9/11 happened. Now, as a Middle East Studies professor today, I know that few young people know a whole lot about what happened with 9/11, the al-Qaeda attacks on US soil, and how the US entangled itself in 20 years of disastrous politics in the Middle East. But suffice it to say that even though Iran had nothing to do with 9/11, it got lumped together with a few other countries in the axis of evil. This was to signal some kind of network of pure evil, erasing any humanity from millions of people. I knew then that what I understood about my country was different from how it was portrayed in the US. What if I could contribute to a more humane, realistic understanding of Iran and, in my own tiny, tiny way, contribute to peace? So I up and packed my bags and went to live in Iran for the first time since I was 10. Well, in Tehran, the dancing hadn't changed. The parties were still epic. And what else I saw working as a reporter was a people that was trying so hard to create a viable politics. Students organizing, women's rights activists starting a groundbreaking signature campaign, journalists launching newspaper after newspaper, reformist politicians trying to change the system from within, and people using every affordance of the internet to create new spaces for dialogue. It's fair to say that I've rarely felt as alive as I did reporting in Iran and subsequently the rest of the region. As people in the know will tell you, the cradle of civilization, as it is known, is a wonderful place full of soul and humanity. Generous and hospitable people, ancient cultures full of traditions and the appreciation of life and beauty, delicious food, fantastic music, and people who have a special kind of appreciation and kindness toward children, their future. But I was also reminded of Western stereotypes working eventually as a reporter. On one of my assignments for Time magazine, I accompanied an American female correspondent to Iran's holiest shrine in the city of Mashhad. When we entered the complex, the attendants gave us the full body cover that is required in places of worship and expressed a bit of giddy surprise over an American visiting. Yet the report that the journalist subsequently wrote bore so little resemblance to what had actually transpired. These friendly enough attendants had been transformed into menacing gatekeepers who would have stopped her in her tracks if they'd known she's American, so that according to her writing, she had to tremble with fear as she navigated the shrine. I was so shocked when I read her report. How could her experience have been so different from what I had witnessed right next to her? In later years, and with a much more generous reading, I've wondered whether she was so conditioned to be scared that she simply saw things differently from how they were. And then she went to amplify that message of fear to her audience. What if the state of the region today is at least partly a crisis of imagination? A crisis of imagination on behalf of us, our politicians, Western governments, to see the humanity of the people in the region. Sure, it's also the result of authoritarian regimes, bad actors, all that wonderful democratic activity that I was describing to you in Iran. There were powerful factions at work trying to shut it all down, and they succeeded. These are the same groups that are fueling anti-American militias across the region. But there's no way to parse the region's modern history apart from Western meddling. From carving up countries and playing up religious and ethnic groups off against each other to divide and conquer, to forced ownership and exploitation of their natural resources, to straight-up coups d'etats against their democratically elected governments, and most recently, an invasion on completely fabricated grounds. And that interaction has been fueled by age-old and tried cliches of the Middle East as backward, death and war-prone, and the denial of these people's humanity. How else do we understand these numbers compiled by Brown University's Cost of War project? More than 4.5 million people killed as a direct or indirect result of the US's so-called war on terror in the region since 9/11. More than 38 million people displaced, many permanently driven from their countries. These are not just numbers. These are people with families, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, people who love their homes and lives, decimated, split apart, uprooted. And this is just these past 20 years. Given this history, why is it that it's the Middle Easterners who are always constantly called upon to prove their humanity? If we return back to the shrine anecdote, those attendants were able to differentiate between a US journalist and her government. They were able to acknowledge her and her humanity and welcome her to their most sacred shrine. That journalist, however, was not able to extend the same grace to those women. I bring up this anecdote because I think how we have conceived of Iran and the Middle East region at large, or been led to see them, has colored our politics in a way that has not only been disastrous for them, but terrible for us too. Here we are again, facing off against Iran with the threat of war looming. How much more of our taxpayer money has to go to fund wars in the Middle East and the slaughter of innocent civilians? In my own country, in claiming to shed the yoke of Western control and cultural imperialism, Islamist revolutionaries hung on to a narrative of liberation rooted in sacrifice and grief. Over decades of resisting this dogmatic, repressive life imposed by the Islamic Republic, people built their own narrative of life in private spaces of the home and parties. And eventually, that narrative spilled over into the public spaces. A few years ago, videos of Iranian women spontaneously breaking into dance in public spaces started going viral. These impromptu acts of dance in public spaces and their mass circulations are nearly impossible for the government to control. Many of these videos come out around Persian New Year, the culture's most important holiday, when Iranians feel particularly joyful. The ancient Persian holiday is a pure celebration of life. It occurs on the very first day of spring, when the earth turns its axis to the sun, the spring equinox. It's called Nowruz, New Day. Uncle Boogie's dance has followed in the footsteps of Iran's brave women. And he's answered not just their call, but a call that is there in Iran's ancient and humanist culture, a call that celebrates life and nature and our precious few days on this beautiful earth. As I look to my country, I see how both the Iranian state and the US government have denied my people in their many and valiant struggles to improve their lives. In this global context of despair that we too have aided, we've left people few options. It is in this context that we have to see these acts of dance as so relevant and powerful. How else can Iranians express their humanity in a way that translates to people everywhere What other message could they be sending their own government and the world? They've tried it all, but it's still not been enough. Uncle Boogie's dance isn't going to change the world. It's not going to change the behavior of their own government or the Western governments, but it is a reminder about the humanity that connects all of us. And it's a call to us to change our narratives, to wash our eyes, as the Iranian poet Sohrab Sepehri says. To see differently, we should. We need to engage more actively with our country's foreign policies by electing leaders who speak of peace, not war, who invest more in diplomacy and dialogue, not weapons, who recognize the humanity of those people, not just in words, but in deeds. Maybe then we can do our part to empower people to change their own lives for the better. The beginning of spring is a perfect time for that. Every year, the earth brings renewal and a message of hope. Let's answer that call. Let's dance for peace and life. Thank you.